Have you ever found yourself doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons? What if your only chance to save a struggling town was to say yes to a man who offered you money, not for love, not even for marriage, but to carry his legacy? Claire Bennett never imagined her life would come down to a contract. She was a woman of warmth, of community, pouring her heart into her small mountain town of Silver Ridge, Colorado. Then came Graham Prescott, wealthy, cold, and so emotionally distant he couldn't remember her name twice. And yet, he made her an offer, one that would fix everything outside her, but ask everything of her inside. What would you do if your choice meant giving a child a future, but not love? Could pretending to care ever lead to something real? And when does a fake family start feeling like home? This is not just a story about unexpected love. It's a story about judgment, kindness, and how sometimes the coldest hearts just need someone brave enough to knock. If this touched something in you already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the stories that help us feel just a little more human. Claire Bennett never thought she'd be offered money to carry someone else's legacy, especially not by a man who couldn't remember her name the second time they met. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she glanced out the frost-flecked window of Maple and Brew. The warm smell of nutmeg and espresso clung to the wooden beams, and soft jazz hummed under the clink of spoons against mugs. Her planner sat open on the counter, pages curling slightly from use. She flipped to the list she had rewritten twice this week. Hay bales, borrowed or budget pumpkin carving contest, prizes needed, and at the very top, circled twice in red ink, find sponsor any sponsor. Just last week, Claire had to postpone the Community Harvest Festival because of budget cuts. She thought the worst she'd face this year was a shortage of hay bales. A bell chimed as the cafe door swung open. A gust of crisp October air carried in a few maple leaves and a man in a charcoal coat, too pressed, too clean for Silver Ridge. He didn't look around, didn't smile. He walked directly to the counter, ordered black coffee with no sugar, and took a seat near the window, back straight, eyes scanning the screen of his phone. Claire blinked. That had to be Graham Prescott, but she didn't have time to dwell. Mrs. McAllister had called about her hallway light again. The old woman couldn't manage the stepladder anymore, and Claire had promised she'd swing by before lunch. "Let me guess," said Cora, placing Claire's to-go cup on the counter. "Same $2 brew." Claire smiled. "And a $1 tip. Just like always." "You know it costs more to tip than the drink." Claire winked. "That's the kind of town we are." Remember, by mid-morning, Claire was on the third rung of Mrs. McAllister's rickety ladder, unscrewing a stubborn bulb. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs, and framed cross-stitch samplers lined the walls. When the new bulb flickered to life, Mrs. McAllister clapped her hands with glee. "That's why you're a treasure, Claire. Silver Ridge doesn't run without you." Claire chuckled. "Tell that to the city council. They just slashed the festival budget." Mrs. McAllister's face fell. "Again, third year in a row," Claire said, descending the ladder. "We might have to skip the pumpkin patch or the parade." "Don't you give up," Mrs. McAllister said firmly. "Someone out there's got a soft spot for this town." As it turned out, someone out there had a soft spot for legacy. Just not for the town. Claire was still brushing dirt from her jeans when she got the message. A representative of Mr. Graham Prescott would like to meet at the library. Noon. The library smelled of old books and quiet dignity. Claire waited in the meeting room, sitting stiffly on one side of a long oak table. She'd changed into her best blouse, faded teal, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and her mother's denim jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of lemon balm. Graham Prescott entered like a man stepping into a boardroom. Not a smile, not a nod, just a curt, "Ms. Bennett, it's Claire." He sat, opened a folder, and placed a thick contract on the table. "I'll make this quick. I need an heir. My grandmother, whom you seem to know, wants a continuation of the family name. You need funding. I'm offering a solution." Claire stared at him. "You want me to carry your child for funding financial security for your town's projects. In return, I get the legacy Irene expects. You don't even remember my name." "I do now." She stood up. Her chair screeched against the floor. "Do you think this is some dystopian fairy tale, that out you'd secure a future for your town?" He interrupted. She looked at the contract. Cream-colored paper, legal jargon, a notary stamp already drying in the corner. Without a word, she tore it in half, then into quarters. He didn't flinch. That was a copy. Claire took a breath, looked out the window toward the square where they used to hang garlands in October, then turned back. "You want peace for your grandmother. Let's give her a love story instead." Graham tilted his head. "What do you mean? You pretend to fall in love. I pretend too. Silver Ridge gets its funding. Your grandmother gets her story. And no one signs anything." He frowned. "Pretending that's dishonest? So's offering a womb like it's a business transaction." He leaned back in his chair. "And if I refuse, then Irene gets a hospital bed and a broken heart." There was silence. Then, finally, he stood. "I don't believe in stories." Claire simply smiled. "That's because no one ever told you a good one. Pretending to be in love with a millionaire is harder when the whole town starts believing it might be true." The pumpkin patches had been arranged like cheerful little villages across the town square. The scent of cinnamon and apples wafted through the air as Claire moved between booths, waving to neighbors, laughing at kids in scarecrow hats, her denim jacket fluttering lightly in the breeze. It was mid-October in Silver Ridge, and the Saturday farmers' market was in full swing. Behind her trailed Graham Prescott, his coat impeccable, his expression unreadable. He offered stiff nods to the people Claire introduced, his eyes scanning like a security system. He wasn't used to being in a place where people smiled for no reason. Claire's hand grazed the arm of his coat as she turned to him. "Try looking like you're not being held hostage. I'm not good at this," he muttered, his eyes landing on a nearby booth, offering apple butter samples. "Whatever this is, try being present," she said, picking up a caramel apple for Mrs. McAllister and slipping a few dollars into the donation jar. "And for the love of small towns, try not to wipe your hands with silk again when you touch fruit." Graham blinked. There was a stem still attached. It was sharp. She couldn't help but smile. God forbid. As they made their rounds, Claire greeted townsfolk by name, introducing Graham with the kind of ease that made him look twice at her. She remembered birthdays, allergies, who had adopted what dog from the shelter. Her world was stitched together by details, and Graham felt like a thread fraying at the edge. "Is that who I think it is called, Mr. Dobbs?" The retired high school principal, from his booth selling knitted scarves. Claire Bennett finally brought a date. Claire rolled her eyes but laughed along. "It's not like that. Mr. Dobbs. That's what they all say before the first harvest kiss." He winked. Nearby, A group from the festival committee chuckled over cider and donuts, already whispering and nudging each other. Claire caught it. Of course, so did Graham. Your town is invested, he said. Better than indifferent. Claire replied, you might learn something. They made their way to the cider booth, where volunteers handed out steaming cups, and the air was filled with the scent of cloves. That's where Claire noticed her. A little girl stood apart from the group, her dark hair slightly tangled, her hands clasped behind her back. She watched them without blinking, not shy, not scared, just observing. Claire took a step closer, crouched down to the girl's level. Hi, I'm Claire. Do you like cider? The girl didn't answer. Instead, she looked down and began drawing in the dirt with a stick. A single, lopsided heart appeared. Then she looked up at Graham, then back at Claire. That's Lily, said a soft voice behind them. Mrs. Kelly, head of the local orphanage, stepped forward. She doesn't talk much, but she watches. More than most. Graham's gaze flicked down to the heart in the dirt. He shifted uncomfortably. Claire turned to Mrs. Kelly. We're glad you brought the kids today. It's good for them to feel part of this. We try, Mrs. Kelly said. But we don't always have the funding for things like hayrides or crafts. Still, Lily insisted on coming. Later, Irene Prescott arrived, bundled in a tartan blanket, her wheelchair guided by a young aide. Her smile stretched wide when she saw Claire. Darling, look at this town. It's still breathing. Graham leaned down to greet her. I brought Claire, as promised. Irene's eyes twinkled. She brings color to your grayscale. Graham. He looked away. In the afternoon, as booths packed up and the air turned brisker, Claire found Graham sitting alone on a hay bale near the pumpkin display. Lily sat beside him, legs swinging, holding a half-eaten donut. In his lap was a small, misshapen pumpkin with Lily's name carved into it. He was holding it awkwardly, like it might break. Claire stood still for a moment. He didn't see her yet, but she watched the corner of his mouth twitch, slightly upward, and almost smile as Lily leaned against his side. She approached slowly. Looks like someone trusts you. Graham looked up, startled. She gave me the pumpkin. She doesn't give many people anything. He paused, turning the pumpkin over gently in his hands. She said it would grow better if I kept it warm. Claire didn't answer. She just sat beside him and handed him a napkin with crumbs from the pecan apple pie she'd bought for Mrs. McAllister, but somehow hadn't delivered yet. They sat in quiet for a while. Then Lily, in a barely audible voice, said, Will you come next Saturday too? Claire hears it, and her heart stirs. Sometimes, the smallest gestures speak the loudest, and the quietest child has the most to say. The cool breeze swept through the cracked window of the Silver Ridge Community Center, tugging lightly at the orange streamers taped above the doors. Outside, fallen leaves scattered like confetti, and inside, the scent of tempera paint and caramel popcorn lingered beneath the soft hum of an old jazz tune playing from the speakers. Claire dipped a small brush into lavender paint and smiled as Lily extended her hand, palm open, eyes wide with anticipation. A butterfly. Today? Claire asked, already knowing the answer. Lily gave the slightest nod. Claire painted with gentle strokes, dotting the wings with tiny flecks of gold. There. Now, you've got wings of your own. Lily studied the delicate butterfly on her skin, as if it might actually flutter. Then, without a word, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around Claire's waist, resting her cheek against her sweater. Claire froze, not out of hesitation, but because something shifted in her chest. It was the kind of quiet connection that asked nothing, but gave everything. Around them, children decorated pumpkins with googly eyes and sequins. Volunteers manned the snack tables, and an elderly gentleman played soft piano renditions of Autumn Leaves. Parents, foster families, and curious visitors wandered the center, chatting warmly, sipping cider. But for Claire, the world had narrowed to the small body leaning into hers. Graham stood by the wall, near the coat rack, arms crossed. His eyes tracked Claire and Lily, but he made no move to interrupt. When Lily's jacket slipped from a nearby chair, he bent to pick it up, then awkwardly held it against his chest. Mrs. McAllister, seated nearby, glanced at him over her knitting. "You're watching like a man trying to read a story upside down." Graham glanced at her, unsure if it was an insult or insight. "I'm just trying to make sure she's okay." "Which one?" the older woman asked, not looking up from her scarf in progress. Graham didn't answer. A few minutes later, Claire ushered Lily toward the craft table. The girl hesitated, then took a sheet of paper and a green crayon. She pressed hard, moving slowly. Claire stood back, giving her space but close enough in case she needed help. 10 minutes later, Lily walked over to the orphanage booth and taped the paper to the window. It flapped slightly in the breeze before she smoothed the corners. Claire wandered closer, her breath catching when she saw it. 3 stick figures, a tall man with a square head, a woman with long scribbled hair, and a small child in between them. Above the trio, a simple word, "Here." Mrs. Kelly stepped beside her, arms folded. That's the first time she's drawn anything since her mother left, not even during art hour. Claire blinked hard, the picture blurring slightly. She taped it to in the window. She wanted others to see it. Mrs. Kelly said softly, "Like claiming space." Later that afternoon, as the event wound down and the children grew tired, Claire noticed Graham standing alone again, his gaze fixed on the drawing. His posture had changed, less armor, more weight. She approached him slowly, the shuffle of her boots soft against the linoleum. "She sees something in you," Claire said quietly. Graham didn't turn. "What if I don't know how to be that?" Claire rested a hand on the back of a nearby chair. "Then we learn together." They stood there for a while, watching the paper flutter lightly against the window. Claire saw Lily across the room, resting her head on a folded blanket, curled up on a small couch with soft flannel and old storybooks. Her eyes were closed, one of her arms draped across Claire's scarf, like it was hers now. Graham adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, but one of his cufflinks slipped loose and clinked onto the hardwood floor. Before he could bend to retrieve it, Lily's voice, barely a whisper, said, "You dropped this, Mr. G." She held it out to him like a secret. He crouched to take it, and for the first time, he smiled just a little. At the diner that evening, Claire sipped coffee at her usual booth, while Mrs. McAllister hummed an old gospel song in the background. The words faded into the clatter of plates and the scent of pie. She looked out the window at the darkening sky. That child's got light in her, Mrs. McAllister said suddenly, sliding a slice of pecan pie toward Claire. "And maybe you do too, dear. You just forgot." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the last of the red leaves across Main Street. The record player in Claire's apartment would be playing Sinatra soon, as it always did after a long day, young at heart, filling the space like a memory. Later that night, Claire sat on the worn couch in her living room, Lily's head on her lap, her tiny hand still faintly stained with purple paint. Lily smiles in her sleep on Claire's lap. Claire doesn't move, afraid she'll wake her from the only peace she's known. Sometimes, it's the things we don't say that speak the loudest. The sun filtered through thin November clouds, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Silver Ridge. Fallen leaves had gathered in lazy clusters along the sidewalks, their brilliant reds and oranges now dulled to rust and copper. The town was settling into the hush of early winter, that in-between season, when breath fogged in the air and everyone reached for an extra blanket at night. At the community center, Claire stood on a creaky ladder, one hand steadying herself on the ceiling beam, while the other pinned a string of paper leaves above the main window. Below her, Graham held the string taut, his tie slightly askew, sleeves rolled up, an unusual sight that hadn't gone unnoticed by the volunteers bustling around them. "Careful," Claire warned playfully. "If this garland goes up crooked, we'll be the scandal of the season." "I thought that title already belonged to our fake romance," Graham replied dryly. She grinned, not looking down. Touché. It had been nearly a month since they first struck their strange deal, and while the arrangement was still technically pretend, something in the air had begun to shift. Graham wasn't just showing up. He was staying longer, helping more, less calculated, more present. Across the room, Lily sat cross-legged on the wooden floor with a handful of other children, stringing popcorn onto yarn. She hummed softly to herself, an off-key melody that had no name, but warmed the heart anyway. Every so often, she'd glance up to make sure Claire was still nearby. Mrs. McAllister arrived mid-morning with her usual tote bag and a tray of molasses cookies wrapped in wax paper. She moved slower than usual, her breath short. Claire spotted her immediately and stepped down from the ladder. "I saved you a seat near the heater," Claire said, gently taking the tray. But Mrs. McAllister didn't respond at first. She stood frozen by the door, staring down at a cream-colored envelope in her hands. It bore a wax seal and elegant script. Her fingers trembled as she tucked it into her coat, saying only, "Wind's sharper today." Claire didn't press. Later, in the kitchen, Claire baked an apple crumble, using her grandmother's handwritten recipe. The scent of cinnamon and butter drifted into the hallways, drawing townsfolk like bees to clover. She cut a warm slice and placed it on a paper plate, then crossed the room to where Graham sat alone near the window. "Bribery," she said, setting the plate in front of him. "Your reward for not stapling yourself to the garland earlier." He picked up a fork, eyeing the dessert warily. "What's in it, memories?" she answered with a wink. "And maybe a little too much nutmeg." He took a bite and paused. His eyes didn't widen in delight, but he nodded slowly. "It's good," he said. "Reminds me of something I never had." Claire sat beside him. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, the wind tossed the empty swings on the playground back and forth in tired arcs. "I was raised by money," he said finally, his voice low. "Not people." Claire didn't say anything, just let the silence settle between them, like snowflakes on a windowsill. Nearby, Lily giggled as she danced in tiny circles to the tune of "Take Me Home." Country Roads, played gently on a guitar by an older man on stage. The whole crowd hummed along. Graham watched the little girl, then looked at Claire. "You care about her? She deserves someone to—" A few minutes later, Lily skipped over and tugged at Claire's sleeve. "Mama Claire." "Look," she said, holding up a lopsided string of popcorn and cranberries. Claire's heart stuttered. Graham, still holding his fork, looked at the girl, then back at Claire. There was something unreadable in his eyes, something softer. "I didn't tell her to call me that," Claire said quickly, but Graham just nodded once and stood up. He walked toward the back of the room, where old photographs of past festivals had been pinned on corkboards, black and white snapshots of hayrides, sack races, pie-eating contests, the kind of joy that didn't cost much, but stayed with you forever. From across the room, Irene Prescott watched her grandson. She turned to Claire with a knowing smile. "He never smiled like that, not once," she said. "Not until now." On stage, a woman sang the final chorus, and people clapped in gentle rhythm. Claire felt something tightening in her chest. Not panic, not fear. Something else. Something like hope. As the event wound down, Graham remained behind. He wandered through the quiet community center, now half-lit by the late afternoon sun. His footsteps echoed lightly on the wooden floor as he stepped onto the low stage and looked out over the empty chairs. For a moment, he imagined a different life, one where he wasn't just an observer of warmth, but a part of it. Behind him, the door creaked open, and Mrs. McAllister entered slowly, her cane tapping on the floor. She clutched the letter from earlier, now slightly creased. Graham gave her a nod, and she nodded back, then made her way to a coat closet in the corner. Inside, she reached for an old photo album stacked on the top shelf and slipped the letter between its pages. The gold lettering on the envelope shimmered in the soft light. Irene Prescott, Chair Emerita. Thanksgiving was always about family. But what if you had to build yours from scratch? The golden light of the late afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains of Irene Prescott's dining room, casting soft halos on the white linen tablecloth and the gleam of polished silverware. The mismatched chairs, borrowed from half the town, lined both sides of the long table, giving the room a feeling of warmth that had nothing to do with matching decor and everything to do with people. Claire adjusted the centerpiece small gourds, dried wheat stalks, and cinnamon sticks bound with twine, and stepped back. Her mother's necklace rested just above her collarbone, a silver locket with a faded photo inside. She only wore it on family holidays. This year, it felt earned. From the kitchen came the smell of roasted turkey, baked yams, and Irene's famous apple sage stuffing. Laughter floated in, muffled and real. Claire peeked toward the living room. Lily was twirling in a dress of deep cranberry velvet, her curls bouncing, a folded paper clutched in her hand. Graham sat near the fireplace, his tie removed, sleeves rolled up, and a look of quiet observation on his face. She crossed to him, brushing her hands on her apron. "You okay?" He nodded. "Just learning what this feels like." Claire smiled, messy, loud, full of carbs. He didn't laugh, but his eyes softened. Soon, the table filled with voices and footsteps. Irene rolled in from the hallway in her chair, wrapped in a cream shawl, her silver hair pinned up. Mrs. McAllister followed behind, walking slower than usual, but with purpose. Trevor arrived last sharp suit, phone still in hand, his eyes scanning the room, as if trying to gauge the strength of its pull. Everyone took their seats, plates stacked with slices of turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes drowning in gravy. Wine glasses clinked, and forks scraped across porcelain. Irene raised a gentle hand. "Before we begin, We share just one thing, something you're thankful for. The table fell into a hush. Mrs. McAllister started. For second chances, someone murmured, Amen. Irene nodded. For stubborn people who teach old ones to feel again. A few chuckles. Claire looked at her hands, then up. For moments that surprise you. For small towns. And for pie. Graham hesitated. All eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat. For this, it was barely more than a whisper, but the silence after it was louder than applause. Lily, not waiting for a turn, whispered from her seat beside Claire. I'm thankful for Mama Claire. And Mr. G. The room held its breath. Graham didn't look at anyone, just reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, elegant watch, silver, its face slightly scratched. He turned to Lily. This was my father's, he said, voice quieter now. You can't tell time yet, but when you hold it, you'll know someone's here. And staying. He placed it in her palm. Claire blinked fast. Irene pressed a napkin to her cheek. Even Trevor shifted. Later, as dessert plates were cleared and the last of the coffee poured, Trevor gestured toward the porch. Graham followed. Outside, the air was sharp, nearly freezing. Porch lights cast amber glows over the fallen leaves, and somewhere in the distance, wind chimes sang. You can still walk away, Trevor said. You've proven your point. They like you now. Graham leaned on the porch rail. That's not the point anymore. You think this will last? Trevor's voice lowered. You don't belong in a town where people name chickens after their grandmothers. I didn't, Graham said calmly. But I might now. Trevor scoffed. If you back out of Denver, they'll laugh. You'll be the guy who gave up millions for a Thanksgiving dinner. Graham turned, looked through the window. Claire was laughing in the kitchen, hair tied up with a ribbon, helping Lily wash pie off her chin. Irene sat close by, humming, and Mrs. McAllister was nodding off in the chair near the fireplace. The table had been cleared, but the warmth remained. The kind of warmth you didn't buy, you earned. When Graham walked back inside, the room quieted. He stood at the head of the table, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out the signed contract, one that would have finalized his expansion into downtown Denver. He held it up, then tore it clean down the middle. I'm withdrawing from the deal, he said. I've made other commitments. Trevor stood up fast. Graham, don't be foolish. I've been foolish most of my life, Graham replied. This isn't that. The room held its breath again. Then erupted not in chaos, but applause. Soft clapping from Irene, a beaming smile from Claire. Lily raised her tiny arms and cheered. Mr. G wins. Trevor left without a word. Graham sat down slowly. Claire reached for his hand under the table, and for once, he didn't pull away. Mrs. McAllister leaned toward Claire, her voice low, words laced with gentle mischief. The chair is yours now, dear. Let's make it official. Not all families are born. Some are chosen, and some arrive quietly. One kind gesture at a time. The tulips along Main Street nodded gently in the breeze, their soft petals catching sunlight like stained glass. Mid-April had come to Silver Ridge in the gentlest way, crisp mornings, birdsong at dawn, and sweaters that no longer needed to be zipped all the way up. The town square, freshly swept and decorated in soft pastels, hummed with life. Balloons bobbed above booths, their strings tangled in the fingers of excited children. Folding chairs flanked the stage, where a microphone waited, already tested. The hand-painted banner across the gazebo read, Spring Gala, a dedication ceremony. Claire stood behind the podium, her light pink cardigan brushing the edge of the podium as she adjusted the microphone. Her palms rested atop a folder, but she hadn't opened it. She didn't need to. The words were already in her, behind her. The new wing of the library shimmered with fresh paint and sunlight streaming through high windows. Inside, walls had been transformed into galleries for children's art paper butterflies, finger-painted suns, and colored pencil stories framed in wooden trim. It wasn't just a room. It was a promise. She scanned the crowd. Lily sat in the front row, flower crown slightly crooked, her legs swinging from a folding chair. Next to her sat Graham, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding a black coffee from Cora's Corner, no cream. No complaint. Irene sat a few rows back, wrapped in a light shawl, smiling in that quiet, knowing way of hers. Claire leaned toward the microphone. We often think of spring as something that happens to us. Buds open, snow melts, birds return. But I've learned that sometimes spring is something we create, together. The crowd stilled. Even the breeze seemed to hush. Today, we open a new chapter for our children and for our community. But I'd like to take a moment to thank the person who reminded me that hearts change faster than headlines, and that sometimes a little discomfort leads to the greatest kindness. She looked toward Graham. He didn't blink, but something shifted in his posture, a quiet bowing of the shoulders. Acceptance? The audience applauded, but Claire raised a hand gently. I also want to honor someone whose gift we didn't fully understand until today. She reached into her folder and pulled out a letter. The envelope bore a gold seal, now slightly worn from handling. It had arrived on her desk just last week, unsigned, except for a note on the back. For your hands, not mine. Mrs. McAllister, Claire called gently. Would you join me? There was a rustle as the crowd turned. The elderly woman stood slowly, aided by a cane, her back straight. Despite the years, as she walked to the stage, Claire stepped aside. Mrs. McAllister didn't need the microphone, but she used it anyway, her voice low and steady. I'm not one for speeches, she began. I'm more for small deeds. A mended hem, a warm casserole, a quiet moment when no one's watching. She paused, then unfolded her own copy of the letter. Years ago, I sat on the board of the Prescott Foundation. No one here knew that, not even Irene. It wasn't a secret, just not something I thought mattered, until I saw what kindness can grow when no one demands credit. She turned toward Claire. My final act on that board was simple. I named Claire Bennett as my successor. A gasp moved through the crowd, like wind in the trees. Because once, when I had no groceries and no family in town, Claire left a bag on my doorstep. No name, no note, just apples and bread and dignity. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Her fingers tightened around the podium edge. That's the kind of leader we need. Not the loudest voice, but the warmest hand. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Later, beneath the string lights hung across the square, Lily tugged at Graham's sleeve. Will you hang it now? She asked, holding up a drawing. Together, they walked to the entrance of the children's art wing. Graham took the thumbtack from her hand and pressed the paper against the corkboard. It was a drawing of a house. Inside it, 3 figures: a man, a woman, and a girl. The man had a square watch on his wrist. The woman wore a pink sweater. The girl held both their hands. Claire leaned in to read the title. Home. She smiled. then turned to Graham. So, still think stories don't matter? He looked at the drawing, then at Claire. The lights shimmered above them, soft and golden, only the ones that end like this. Sometimes, the most unexpected families begin with a broken plan and a quiet hope. Claire offered kindness when it wasn't required, and Graham learned that warmth doesn't come from legacy. It's built one moment, one choice at a time. When we stop judging what we see and start listening for what's silent, hearts often find their way home. Like a porch light glowing in spring dusk, a single act of care can guide someone through the dark. And if this story touched something in you, maybe it's time to let someone else feel its warmth, too. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it warmed your heart or made you see kindness a little differently, consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. See you in the next one.